Good afternoon. My name is Claude Steele, and I'm the Provost of Columbia University, and it's my role and my great pleasure to welcome you to yet another World Leaders Forum this week. This event is co-sponsored with the Columbia's Committee for Global Thought. Today we will be hearing an address from Prime Minister Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia. The Prime Minister's address is titled "The Current Global Environment and Its Impact in Africa." Columbia University President Lee Bollinger launched the World Leaders Forum in 2003 as a university-wide initiative to support uninhibited dialogue on the most pressing economic, political, environmental, and social questions of our time, questions that with each passing year have a larger and larger global dimensions to them. Over the past 7 years, the forum has offered an opportunity for more than 15,000 students, faculty, and staff to directly engage important figures from 48 nations of the world, representing all corners of the globe. Our experience has confirmed the animating principle of the World Leaders Forum, that only through informed dialogue, critical scholarship, and a free exchange of ideas will answers emerge to the biggest problems facing the world today. The role of universities in creating a space for uninhibited and critical discussions of controversial issues has been noted on many occasions. If anything, the changes we are seeing in public discourse serve to heighten the importance of this role. Universities not only are places where difficult conversations are respected and encouraged. Today, it sometimes appears that universities may be the only remaining venue where such conversations occur with any regularity. We now are halfway through a week of World Leaders Forum events held at Columbia, which coincide with the fall meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. Already, a broad and diverse group of leaders from Africa, Europe, and Asia have visited our campus, challenged us with their views, and enriched our understandings of the world. Before this week concludes, we will also hear from the heads of state of Portugal, Croatia, and Turkey. Every visiting leader faces unscreened, uninhibited questions from our university community at the conclusion of his or her remarks. The World Leaders Forum offers an invaluable opportunity to our students and faculty, an opportunity that would be difficult, if not impossible, to replicate in any other city or at any other university. We are grateful that heads of state and other world leaders continue to express a strong interest in coming here to speak. The recognition of Columbia's World Leaders Forum by heads of state around the world signals that the value of the forum extends well beyond the university community assembled in the audience for these addresses. Very often, in the open question and answer period that follows an address, foreign leaders are confronted with probing questions that they may not face in their home countries. Providing such a forum for debate and controversial ideas and issues is central to the university's free speech values, its educational values, and its role as a global center of learning. Today's questions and answer session will be moderated by Mamadou Diouf, a professor of history and director of the Institute for African Studies at Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs. For all of these reasons, it should be evident that providing a university forum does not imply an endorsement of the views expressed in these addresses or the policies pursued by these governments, but instead serves as a very different purpose central to the university. Very simply, we have a responsibility to offer our community the chance to engage in conversations with men and women directly involved in the major challenges of the 21st century. I would like now to introduce University Professor Joseph Stiglis, who is chair of Columbia's Committee on Global Thought, who will then introduce Prime Minister Zenawi. Professor Stiglis, no doubt, is well known to many of you. He is one of our proud Nobel laureates, and he is a widely recognized commentator on global economic issues and an esteemed member of the Columbia University faculty. So with no further ado, I will turn this over to Joe Stiglis. Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure to introduce Prime Minister Meles Zenawi to Columbia University to discuss the current global environment and its impact on Africa. Let me just say a few words about Prime Minister Zenawi, who is here in New York this week with 140 heads of state attending the United Nations General Assembly, which is focused on the Millennium Development Goals. So we appreciate his taking the time to visit our campus and talk about the economic issues facing Africa in the world economy's current fragile state. I hope he will, and I'm sure he will, say a few words about Ethiopia's economic progress. As was mentioned, following today's talk, there will be a question and answer period moderated by Mamadou Diouf, Director of the Institute for African Studies and a member of the Committee on Global Thought. Let me say now a few words about Ato Meles Zenawi. He interrupted his studies at the medical faculty of Addis Ababa University in 1974 to join the fight to overthrow the Mengistu regime, which in turn had overthrown Emperor Haile Selassie in the aftermath of one of the worst famines the world has seen, the famine of 1972-74, which had killed an estimated 40,000 to 80,000 Ethiopians, with some estimates being even higher. After 17 years of fighting in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union, they finally succeeded in ending what had come to be called the Red Terror, which had earned the reputation as one of the most oppressive regimes in the world. And Meles, at that point, became president of the transitional government. He was then elected prime minister in 1995. While fighting in the guerrilla war, he realized that the future of his country would depend on economic development and growth, and that would require an understanding of economics. At least I hope that's important. There are some countries in East Asia who think that engineers are better and that economists would be better to send away. But anyway, I think economics is important. He undertook his studies through correspondence courses, eventually receiving degrees from the Open University in the United Kingdom and Erasmus University in the Netherlands. Ethiopia has been noted for its economic performance. In fact, my encounter with Ethiopia began my first visit as chief economist of the World Bank in 1997, and it was also my last visit as chief economist of the World Bank in 2000. According to World Bank figures, the country has shown strong growth for much of the last decade, and especially in the last few years. From 2004 to 2008, it had a double-digit real growth rate, placing it among the very top of the world. That rate dropped, not surprisingly, with the global recession, but different estimates still place it around 70%, and it is projected to rise again. The Prime Minister has become an active voice for Africa, including serving as chairman of the Organization of the African Union, and is currently serving as co-chairman of the Global Coalition for Africa. In 2004, he was appointed by UK Prime Minister Tony Blair as one of the commissioners taking part in the Commission for Africa, and he played a critical role in shaping the report of that commission, which in turn has had a great deal of influence on policies towards Africa, beginning with the Glen Eagles G8 conference. The Prime Minister has also represented the African continent at a number of G8 and G20 meetings subsequently. More recently, he has become greatly involved in the issue of climate change, which is having an enormous impact on Africa, probably the region which has been most impacted by climate change. He has become the African Union spokesperson on climate change, and he was asked by the Secretary General to serve as the co-chairman with UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown of the panel established after Copenhagen to follow up on the financing pledges made at Copenhagen to assist the developing countries deal with climate change. Today, the World Leaders Forum and the Committee on Global Thought thank you for participating in this academic dialogue with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and I look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for that wonderful introduction. The last 3 decades, which could be described as the decades of the emergence and triumph of neoliberalism in key centers of global power, and hence throughout much of the world, have been very bad decades for Africa. they have, for all intents and purposes, been lost decades. At the beginning of this period, Africa faced a huge debt burden and associated macroeconomic imbalances and low rates of economic growth due to weak management of the economy and unfavorable external circumstances. It was therefore forced to seek support from the international financial institutions, which had by then become key enforcers of the emerging neoliberal paradigm. Africa was asked to undergo fundamental neoliberal economic reforms in return for the support it sought from the international financial institutions. These reforms were sold as the ultimate salvation for its problems and were supposed to lead to sustained economic growth and transformation. The reforms could not and did not lead to salvation. On the contrary, the limited industrialization of the continent that had taken place since independence was reversed with no economic revival in sight. The emergence of neoliberalism at the end of the 70s thus generated a lost decade for Africa in the 80s. The end of the Cold War at the beginning of the 90s heralded the triumph of neoliberalism throughout the world. Indeed, the 90s was the decade not only of the triumph of the paradigm, but also of triumphalism of neoliberalism, exemplified by such theories as the end of history. The neoliberal political and economic order was defined as the ultimate destination of history towards which all societies will and must march. The decade-long failure of neoliberalism in Africa could not thus be blamed on the paradigm. Africans had to and were blamed for the failure of the paradigm, as they were alleged to have been less than enthusiastic in implementing it. They were told that their only option was to persevere and carry out even more thoroughgoing neoliberal reforms. They could see for themselves that neoliberalism was the only game in town, and they were reminded of that very fact every time they grumbled. This insanity of implementing the same failed neoliberal policies and expecting different outcomes resulted in another lost decade during the 90s. While Africa was mired in perpetual economic crisis and associated political malaise, punctuated by horrific and senseless violence, neoliberal globalization was making tremendous progress, with constantly changing centers of global growth. In the 80s, it was Germany and Japan who seemed to be unstoppable and were leading the pack. China, with its enormous human resources, was also entering a period of extraordinary growth and transformation and integrating with the global economy. In the 90s, the former communist bloc in East and Central Europe collapsed and was progressively opened up for business. China became a rising star of the global economy, while India was doing in the 90s what China had done in the 80s. While India and China were thus emerging as new centers of global economic growth, Japan and Germany lost steam and were mired in prolonged economic malaise. The US and the UK, at the heartlands of neoliberalism, came roaring back and were growing faster than the rest of the developed countries. It was towards the end of the roaring 90s, as Joe describes them, that the pretense of neoliberal reforms finally leading to sustained growth and transformation in Africa was finally and more or less explicitly abandoned. Africa was now more or less explicitly being managed as a lost case, as a continental ghetto on the margins of a fast globalizing world. The demand for the commodities it produced, and which constituted the basis of its tenuous linkage with the global economy, was limited and diminishing. Poverty in Africa was seen to be endemic. The new name of the game thus became not the transformation of Africa's poverty through neoliberal reform, through neoliberal or other reforms, but the management of its chronic poverty. The objective became to alleviate poverty in Africa and limit the damage of its poverty to itself and to the rest of the world. A new generation of externally driven poverty alleviation strategies thus mushroomed overnight throughout the continent. Alleviating the poverty and its consequences of the continental ghetto was the objective of the global aid business. People seem to have more or less given up on the productive incorporation of Africa to the global economy and appear to have spawned a whole industry to manage the consequences of its marginalization. The first decade of the 21st century represents a period of both continuity and change in Africa. For a third decade in a row, the failed neoliberal orthodoxy continued to be imposed on the continent with broadly similar results. At the same time, the emergence of new players in the global economy in general and the emergence of China in particular was beginning to have significant impacts on Africa's economic prospect. The commodities that Africa produces were in far greater demand and were fetching the highest prices in many decades as a result of the emergence of these new players. This development was the main cause of the significantly higher growth rate in Africa at the beginning of this century. Investments in infrastructure, which had been more or less totally abandoned, together with the neoliberal reforms and Africa's marginalization from the global economy, were initiated again by the new global actors seeking Africa's commodities. The continental ghetto was beginning to strengthen its economic linkage with the rest of the world and the new centers of global growth in particular. As the emerging powers were either opposed to neoliberalism or reluctant to evangelize on its behalf, a new and different game came to town. The neoliberal game was still the dominant game in town, but it was no longer the only one. By the end of the decade, the biggest and the most profound crisis of neoliberalism had gripped the world. Neoliberalism, which had generated a 3 decades-long crisis in Africa, which had resulted in various crises in Asia and Latin America in the 90s, now had come back home to roost. The US and the UK were in the grip of the deepest crisis since the Great Depression of the 30s. Given the role that the US economy plays in the world, the crisis is beginning to shake the fundamental structures of neoliberal globalization. I am convinced that there is a silver lining for Africa because of the nature of the current global crisis. I say so for 2 fundamental reasons. First, while the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom may have been a little too optimistic when he pronounced the Washington Consensus dead here in New York, it is nevertheless true that it has been profoundly weakened and shaken particularly outside its heartlands. The crisis has shown that neoliberalism has failed not only in the peripheries, as used to be the case, but also in its heartland. The crisis has also shown that those who have rejected it have continued to prosper even during the crisis. The crisis has also speeded up the change in global economic power and further weakened the dominant position neoliberalism has had for decades. Africans have, for the first time in 3 decades, real alternatives to the orthodoxy. They now have a choice that they have not had for a long time. The fact that Africans now have a choice is, in and of itself, fundamentally liberating. Above and beyond that, Africans now have a real chance to chart a new course of development, one that incorporates best practice elsewhere and is capable of generating fast growth and transformation. Africans can, of course, miss this new opportunity to make a choice and make the wrong choice. But that would be their choice and their mistake to make. Unlike the neoliberal orthodoxy that was imposed on them from outside, the choices they make now are theirs and theirs alone. Just as Africans are capable of making the wrong choice and missing the boat, they are also capable of making the right choice and capitalizing on the new opportunity created by the global crisis of neoliberalism. Second, the crisis has shown that Africa is an essential part of the solution to the current global economic problem. The US and UK can no longer borrow and spend to keep the global economy moving. While the emerging powers can do a lot to fill in the gap, they cannot fully compensate for the lack of effective demand globally. Africa, with its billion people, has to be incorporated in the global network of production and consumption if globalization is to have a new lease of life. The labor-intensive manufacturing that China is no longer competitive in has to relocate somewhere. Africa is the main hinterland that is available for global investment in labor-intensive manufacturing and the production of tropical agricultural products. It is also a major supplier of the mineral wealth that is required to keep the global economy growing. The world cannot afford a continental ghetto anymore. While the need to incorporate Africa in the global network of production and consumption creates a new opportunity for Africa, it does not by any means guarantee success. The rest of the world may lack the foresight and leadership to effectively deal with the current prolonged economic crisis by, among other things, bringing 1 billion people in Africa to the global network. We Africans may fail to capitalize on the new opportunity that the current global conjuncture has created for us. But the fact remains that we now have an opportunity that we have not had for decades. The challenge for African leaders posed by the current global environment is thus unique and pregnant with possibilities. The challenge is to use the demise of neoliberalism as the only game in town, to change course and chart a path of inclusive growth and transformation. The challenge is to use the unique global environment to productively link Africa with the rest of the world and to forge a new and more inclusive globalization. While there is no guarantee that the current crop of African leaders will rise to the occasion, it is not preordained that they will fail. The fact that it is now up to us as Africans to choose, to make our own mistakes and learn from them is, however, of historic importance. 50 years after the independence of Africa, the current crisis may yet engender the second liberation of Africa. I thank you.
First of all, let me thank the Prime Minister for a very rich and powerful presentation. Again, my name is Mamadou Diouf, and as the director of the Institute for African Studies, I was asked to moderate this part of our event today, which is the Q&A. So the rules of the game are quite simple. You have 2 mics in the aisles. When you want to ask a question, please move closer to the mics, and I will identify you and give you a floor. The organization is quite simple. We have 20 minutes of question, and we would like to entertain many questions. Please keep your questions short, precise, and you will have a chance to ask your question, and I'm sure the Prime Minister will be happy to answer them. So I will begin on my...
Yes. Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. First of all, thank you for your speech. My name is Patrick Martin-Ménard. I'm a graduate student here at Columbia. I would like to know, could you tell us how were your party and its allies able to get 99.6% of the vote in last May's election? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
My party did not get 99.6% of the vote. It got 99.6% of the seat. And there's a difference in parliamentary systems. In parliamentary systems, as you might know, for example, the Labour Party in the United Kingdom was in power with roughly 39% of the vote. It's a first past the vote system. You do not have to have the total vote in a seat to win that seat. If you get 50% plus one in every of the seats, you get 100% of the seats, just with just 50 plus 1% of the vote. But we did get an overwhelming majority of the vote. And I suspect after 7 years of double-digit growth, 7 years of roughly 11.6% growth, after 7 years of very equitable growth, Ethiopia's Gini coefficient is 0.29. It is the lowest in the continent and one of the lowest in the world, which means our growth has been very broadly equitable. Given these two facts alone, I would be very surprised if we didn't get overwhelming support from the population.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. My question is regarding the Middle East, and I wanted to know your views on Iran, its nuclear program, relationship with the United States, and role in the region in general.
As you know, we Africans have declared Africa a nuclear-free zone, and we would like to make sure that there are more nuclear-free zones, especially close to our neighborhood. I am not sure whether Iran's nuclear program is for military purposes or for civilian purposes. There are two sides to that story, but I'm pretty sure that a nuclear arms race in the Middle East would be catastrophic to the Middle East, and it would be very damaging to Africa. And so we support dialogue to resolve this problem. We support denuclearization in the region, and we believe that another war in that part of the world could be very damaging to everybody.
Last week we had the Prime Minister of Bhutan come, and his main point was gross domestic happiness. I'm interested to know what you think the most important factor in the Ethiopian people's happiness is, and what your role in that factor is.
Well, I want to study that concept of gross domestic happiness. It sounds to be a very interesting new idea, but as of now, I can't say I have read enough to understand it well, and so my view may be a little bit, to some extent, out of date. In the case of Ethiopia, my feeling is that the main challenge in Ethiopia is poverty. I am sure many of you will have heard of, those of you who have heard of Ethiopia will have heard of it in the context of poverty, famine, and war. And this have been killing people by the millions. So my hunch is that overcoming poverty and ensuring food security could contribute to the happiness of Ethiopians. And therefore my main focus at this stage is to achieve that.
Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, you talked a lot about choice, free choice for Africans and I assume for Ethiopians. So my question is, should we really take you at your word when you talk about free choice when your country is known to restrict the press and even restrict websites that Ethiopians might read.
I think choice is very important, is fundamental to every human being's free expression of himself or herself. I believe I have contributed my fair share to fighting systems in Ethiopia that were unmistakably oppressive. I fought for 17 years to remove the Mengistu dictatorship. After that, we made sure that those previous dictators who are not accused of crimes were given the opportunity that they denied every other Ethiopian, which is that they were given the free choice to express themselves, including through the media. Now, when they do express themselves through the media, those remnants of the Mengistu regime, you would expect them to be less than grateful to those who removed them from power. Over the years, in bringing choice to Ethiopians, we have had to trample on a few toes. And those toes have had difficulty accepting the status quo in Ethiopia. The status quo of Ethiopia is not one of repression of the press. The status quo in Ethiopia is not that of repression of free choice. It is one of building these opportunities.
My name is Biola. I'm an econ senior at Columbia here. I'm Nigerian, so naturally I'm interested in what goes on in Ethiopia. The influence on the continent is pretty great. My question is, how different is your regime from Mengistu? Since we know in 1993 there was like an immense repression of a student demonstration, and the same thing happened in 2005. And these were the same things Mengistu did that made people so annoyed at him. How different is your regime when you're doing almost the same thing?
Well, for those on the receiving end of the Mengistu regime, they would not have any difficulty distinguishing our regime from that of the Mengistu regime. The period of Red Terror, I'm sure you will have been told, is a period when people were killed without any recourse to the courts, and their families were charged by the number of bullets that were used to kill these people. That type of criminality and oppression is dead. It's finished, and it is not coming back. I understand some people might have misgivings about it, but it is not coming back.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, my name is Tim Kirk. I'm from the Public Health School. A question of clarification or definition. The major concept in your talk surrounded neoliberalism, which played the role of the villain in your talk. And as we go from different place to different place, people have different definitions of neoliberalism. So I wonder if you could help us understand maybe a thumbnail sketch of what you're talking about when you talk about neoliberalism, and what element or set of elements in there was the most harmful to Africa.
Neoliberalism, as it applied to Africa, started from diagnosis of the African economic problem in the 70s. The diagnosis was based on the assumption that the problem in Africa was the African state, that the African state was dabbling in economic issues that should not be of its concern. And that is the reason why Africa was not making progress. So the solution to that problem was to keep the African state small, weak, and out of economic interference. And so the creation of so-called night watchman state in Africa, in an environment where Joe would have it, massive market failures, whether it's infrastructure or education or health, meant that all the necessary investments that are required to kick the process of development and industrialization forward were not forthcoming. I'll give you one example. In infrastructure, power, roads, telecommunication, and so on. The idea was that the private sector would invest in infrastructure in Africa. It didn't for 30 years. It's only now that the Chinese are investing. So the period of massive investments in infrastructure in Africa were periods where foreigners wanted Africa's commodities. First period being in the 19th century, where Europeans needed Africa's commodities, and they got it through colonialism. They carried out massive investment in infrastructure. Second period is the beginning of the 21st century, where countries such as India and China also needed these commodities, could not resort to colonialism, did not want perhaps to resort to colonialism, and so they invested in infrastructure in a very different manner. So it's only at the beginning of the 21st century, with the emergence of new powers, that we have investment in infrastructure, and without that, there cannot be economic growth. So the bottom line is, the idea of neoliberalism that we oppose is that it does not allow the state to play a positive and active role in addressing market failures that impede development in Africa.
Okay, I would like to take the privilege of a moderator, and for the sake of gender balance, to ask two women in this side to ask the two next questions. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, come up and ask your question. Two. I would like two questions. No, not you.
I can't ask a question?
No, not you. You wait for the two women and you will ask your question.
Salam. My name is Titana Merce, and I'm an alumni of the school.
Yeah.
Is it better now? Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Titana Merce. I'm an alumni of the Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. My question is relating to the Ethiopian economy. It has grown by more than 10%, but yet recently the Ethiopian birr has been devalued significantly. If this devaluation is meant to promote import substitution, does this mean that your model of agricultural-led economy is flawed, or something's wrong with it?
You're right. We have had a steep devaluation of our currency in recent weeks. There are a number of reasons for it. The first and most important reason is that we have had, again, double-digit inflation rates for more than 2 years now. And that clearly has that needed to be corrected. So we devalued to correct the overvaluation of our currency that came about as a result of the high inflation we have had for more than 2 years. We needed to correct that, and we needed to correct that in a step-by-step manner. We couldn't do much when we were in a period of high inflation, because the devaluation might have triggered even higher inflation. So we had to delay the devaluation until such time as we could safely do it. And we felt it's time now for us to safely devalue our currency to correct the overvaluation that had taken place a few years before. This is the main reason. The second reason is to promote exports. And as you might know, our industrial and economic development strategy as a whole is one of export-led development, whether it's in agriculture or in industry. And secondly, while supporting exports, we also hope that the devaluation will push import substitution forward. I would argue that this is consistent with our strategy, but I can understand why people would think that this may be a midterm correction on our part. But my argument would be that it would be consistent with our strategy all along.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ribka Getacho, and as a student of Columbia University, I can honestly say that one of the reasons that I chose this university was for forums like this that give us a forum for open and academic discussion. And I mean, with that being said, just to further my friend's point earlier that was asked as far as media access in Ethiopia, what can you say are possible justifications for, let's say, for example, VOA being denied access in Ethiopia or other media outlets? Now, in addition, aside from that, what can you say that is actively being done from the Prime Minister's perspective that can improve relations with our neighboring countries, with Eritrea, with Somalia, with Sudan? What is actively being done today that, and I don't mean just is being said that's done, but is actively being done to ensure that this year, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, there won't be any tension actively being done?
Now, I do not know if you know this, but VOA is not allowed to broadcast to the United States by law. It is allowed to broadcast to other countries, but not to the United States, because it is supposed to reflect the policy of government in power of the day. Now, VOA Amharic service happened to be dominated by people who are associated with the previous regime. And those who are associated with the previous regime tend to have a particularly jaundiced view of events in Ethiopia for understandable reasons. And we took a page from the policy of the United States and said VOA is not welcome to broadcast to Ethiopia either. But that is different from the right of expression by citizens. The freedom to express oneself is a fundamental right of every citizen. And that right, as you might know, is properly protected in Ethiopia. Now, with regards to relations with our neighbors, we have excellent relations with all of our neighbors with the exception of Eritrea. We have excellent relations with Sudan. We actually happen to be one of the very few governments in the world who can talk in confidence with both the government in the north and the SPLM in the south. We have excellent relations with Djibouti. We have excellent relations with Kenya. We have excellent relations with the Somali government. We have very bad relations with a group called Al-Shabaab. But it's understandable that we would have very bad relations with Al-Shabaab because it's a terrorist group linked with Al-Qaeda. And the only country backing Al-Shabaab in the region is Eritrea. And as you know, the Security Council imposed sanctions on Eritrea for that reason, because it was supporting this group linked with Al-Qaeda. The Security Council and the African Union felt that Eritrea needed to be penalized, and so it has been penalized. Understandably, therefore, those of us who are not particularly happy with the Al-Qaeda types have had difficulty relating positively towards the current regime in Eritrea. But I want to also remind you that our government was the first government in the world to recognize the independence of Eritrea from Ethiopia after the referendum. And again, this is the reason why some Ethiopians have a particularly jaundiced view of our government.
Okay, I'm very sorry, but we have room left only for no more than 4 questions. So I will take 2 questions from this side and 2 from this.
Mr. Prime Minister, in anticipation of your coming here to Colombia, some of the media covering your arrival here used the word dictator in their articles. Do you have any regrets from your long tenure as leader of your country?
I have none. I'm particularly proud with the results, with my track record. I'm particularly proud of the results of the efforts of my party. I believe I have made a modest contribution to the success of my party in Ethiopia, both in removing a particularly brutal dictatorship of the Mengistu regime and in rebuilding Ethiopia on a new basis after the removal of that dictatorship. So I'm very proud of my track record.
Prime Minister, it's true that you fought hard and you defeated the most brutal regime in modern Ethiopian history, the Dud. That's very true. And I think it's safe to say that you claim that your government is under a democracy. But there's proof that shows the contrary. For example, just shuttering the independent press in Ethiopia, especially after the 2005 election, jamming international broadcast stations, including Ethiopia's independent satellite television station, your troops killing nearly 200 unarmed protesters who were protesting an election that overseers who were neutral said was very non-transparent. The jailing of many people who do not share your ideas, including the leader of the largest opposition group, Tukan Madeksa. And with these facts in light, do you see how people would not see that as a democracy? Do you see that? And if you have a contrary belief with that in light, can you explain to us how that is a democracy? Thank you.
I can understand people who have had inadequate chance to consider the facts, to see for themselves, coming to the conclusion that you appear to have come to. So I understand that.
It's not, I'm just saying facts. I haven't come to.
No, please.
Let me take one of your facts.
Let him answer.
And that is that of Burtukan Mideksa. This lady was taken to court, an independent court that was observed by both representatives of the European Union and the American Embassy in Addis. She was sentenced to a long prison sentence. After serving a few weeks, she sought pardon from the government. She admitted that she committed a crime. She admitted that she had been properly tried in a proper court of law. And she sought pardon from the government and the people of Ethiopia. In the interest of reconciliation and progress in our country, I felt that she should be pardoned. And she, among others, was pardoned and released. After she was released, she rebuilt her party, continued to rebuild her party for about 11 months, and she went abroad for a visit. During that visit abroad, she issued a statement to the effect that she did not ask for pardon and that she was not given pardon. Now, our law, pardon law, says that if a pardon is given and is sought under false pretenses or given under false pretenses, it is automatically null and void. So if she didn't ask for pardon, then the pardon given to her was completely illegal. When she came back from abroad, the police told her that her statement would necessarily lead to her being detained again, unless she were to admit that she did indeed seek pardon and was indeed given pardon. Then the pardon given to her would be legally invalid. She was given a month to think about it. During this month, many friends, including ambassadors in Addis, talked to her to try to convince her that because her pardon, her plea for pardon was the basis of her freedom. If she denied it, she would be forcing the hand of the government and would have to be put back in prison. She didn't feel convinced that she should retract the statement she issued in Sweden. And so at that stage, we had no option but to detain her. Given her past practice, I wouldn't be surprised if she asked for pardon again. And given the practice of the government, I wouldn't be surprised if the government were to pardon her again. So I can go on through all of the facts that you had in the same manner, but I'm sure I would be boring.
No, you don't have to. But it just
No. Let other people ask that question.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Sicular, and I was wondering, how many terms may a prime minister serve in Ethiopia? And I'd like your thoughts on the concept of term limits.
Again, I'm sorry, I will take the last question here and leave the Prime Minister to ask me.
I suppose you are aware that in a parliamentary system, the party that wins the majority of the seats gets the power every time. There are term limits in the United States, but none in the United Kingdom. I would hope you would understand that the United Kingdom is perhaps just as democratic as the United States, and that the parliamentary system is just as democratic as the presidential system. The presidential system requires term limits. Prime ministerial systems or parliamentary systems do not require presidential systems. But in case you are wondering whether I have plans to stay in power until kingdom come, I can assure you that this will be my last term in power.
Last question.
To Esteemed Prime Minister Meles, I want to applaud you for exercising a different type of economic choice. In 2004, I brought to Getachew Mengistu, my dear friend, a plan for you to take control of your coffee brands. He brought it to you. He had the courage to come, and you had the strength to pursue that very, very well. And I have to tell a little story that you were reported to have said in just one moment. What we did together was to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars for the coffee farmers, more than the World Bank tells me they achieved in rural income. We changed the paradigm of Africa in terms of intellectual property owned by the people, And we've convinced the US government that this was all a good thing because they were supporting coffee in the first place. But I have to ask you just one thing, and that is Ambassador Samuel Asafar and I were fighting in that battle against big coffee, and particularly Starbucks. And he said to me, he'd been worried one dark day when we might lose. And he said that he asked you if perhaps Ethiopia should give in. And you said, I'm not authorized to surrender these rights. These were the ownership of the historical heritage coffee brands. And he said, what do you mean? And I heard from him, and I've repeated in many forums, including the G8 Committee on Intellectual Property, that you said, these are assets of future generations, and they didn't tell me I could give them away. I applaud you, sir.
Well, for some people who may not know this, Ethiopia is the source of Arabica coffee. And so we can rightly claim the intellectual property right of Arabica coffee. Together with some of our friends in the United States, we wanted to do that. We wanted to register some of our coffee varieties. We have over 200 coffee varieties in Ethiopia. And we wanted to patent, as it were, 2 or 3 of them as a starting point. We made some progress in the United States first, but some of the major coffee companies were not happy with it. And so, with the support of friends here, particularly Oxfam US, we tried our very best. In the end, I think we have succeeded in registering 3 of our coffee varieties here and in Europe. We have ways to go in terms of registering our coffee variety in Japan, but we'll do it. And obviously, I did not have any right to abandon that intellectual property. I didn't create it. Past Ethiopians created it over thousands of years. And it does not belong to me. It belongs to all Ethiopians of the future. So I had no right to negotiate on this right. I would have been happy to negotiate had it been my property or my right, but it was not.
So I'm very sorry. It was the last question. We don't have time for additional questions. So I would like to ask the Prime Minister if he has closing remark and reacting to the type of engagement he experienced today with our community.
I welcome the engagement of students this afternoon. The fact that they cared enough about Ethiopia to try to find out what is happening in Ethiopia, even if what they found out was not necessarily consistent with the reality, they did try. And I appreciate that very much. Ethiopia is a poor country. It's been mired in conflict for decades. It is in a very rough neighborhood. Somalia is just to the east of us, and Sudan is to the west of us. We are in between these 2 major fires. So that's a very tough neighborhood. But I want to tell you all that we are making progress, that we are getting out of the cycle of poverty and violence, and that this is open for everybody to see. So I would like to invite you all to come and visit Addis. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank all of you for participating to this debate and promoting the global debate. And I would like also to thank the Prime Minister for engaging in a very frank exchange with the Columbia community. Thank you very much. Thank you.